else. We do this before services, important meetings, and events. We do it that the flame may light our way.
Đi cho ông con nhé. Để cho mẹ. Xin mình đấy.
I'm having trouble with my match. Hold on. There it goes. Before we get to tonight's presentation, I'm going to turn this over to our tech team leader, Val Rosado, who will tell you how you may use some of the features of Zoom to participate in tonight's discussion. Val?
Hi, welcome. We're glad you're here. If a question comes to mind during the presentation, please feel free to type the question into the chat box. If you're not familiar with Zoom, if you move your cursor around the screen, usually it's either at the very bottom or over on the right or up at the top, and you'll find the word chat. And if you open that chat box, you can type, and after you type your question, be sure to press enter. There's no submit button or anything. Enter is the submit button. Those questions then will be read after the presentation by a member of the tech team. And during the question and answer period, as well as what's in the chat box, you can feel free to raise your hand and someone from the tech team will call on you to ask your question. Please stay muted during the presentation. There are a lot of us here and we don't want to have a lot of extraneous background sounds. So the panelists will have their microphones open, but we ask you to keep it closed until we get to the question and answer period, and then you can mute and unmute as needed. I think that's it.
Okay, thank you, Val.
Mm-hmm.
Tonight we have a panel of local faith leaders who will be talking about confronting racism. In this discussion, all of the speakers are free to express their opinions, but please know that the opinions expressed are not necessarily the opinions of the Unitarian Universalist congregation of Lake County. The moderator of tonight's panel is Sandy Haxton. Sandy was ordained as an interfaith, interspiritual minister in 2018 by One Spirit Seminary in Manhattan after completing a 2-year seminary program. In 2016, Sandy founded the Interfaith Council of Lake County following the Pulse nightclub mass shooting. She served on the board of that organization until January of 2021. Most recently, she worked for Faith in Florida to organize 2 Souls to the Polls rallies in Tavares and Leesburg for the 2020 election. She sits on the NAACP's Religious Affairs Committee. Some of you may remember Sandy from last August when she was our guest speaker at another of these Zoom lectures, where she addressed the question, why isn't the faith community fighting for social justice? Sandy lives in Mount Plymouth, Florida, with her husband, Laird Haxton. We are delighted to have her and our other panelists with us tonight. Sandy.
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much, Russ. I would now like to introduce the rest of the panelists. Pastor John Christian refers to himself as a man in motion, and in motion he has been. He's a son and husband and the father of 4. In 2000, he started his church, the Christian Worship Center in Leesburg. That church now has locations in Leesburg, Groveland, and Wildwood. In 2004, he won a seat on the Leesburg Commission. He has now served as mayor of Leesburg for 4 times. Because of term limits, his term on the council will be his last. He is also a community activist and is the founder of Men in Distinction. And I would now like to introduce Pastor Mike Watkins. Among his many accomplishments, Pastor Michael J. Watkins has been married to his wife, Kimberly, for 37 years. He has 2 daughters, 3 granddaughters, and 3 great-grandchildren. He was first appointed pastor of New Mount Zion Christian Methodist Episcopal Church of New Smyrna Beach in July 1995. In 2000, he was appointed pastor of Friendship Christian Methodist Episcopal Church of Tavares, Florida. He's a community activist involved in prison ministries for the past 15 years, and he is a founding member and president of the Tavares African American Heritage Organization. He successfully led the movement to stop the Lake County Board of Commissioners from bringing the Confederate statue to Lake County. And I would now like to introduce Reverend David Crump. Reverend David Crump is the son of missionary parents, and although he was born in the United States, he grew up in Brazil. Over the last 30 years, his personal sense of calling has taken him to a church ministry in a Native American community and to lead management roles with a number of nonprofit organizations. He is currently the grants manager for the Farm Workers Association of Florida in Apopka. He has master's degrees in philosophy and theology and a doctorate of ministry in cross-cultural ministry. I will start by asking questions of our very distinguished panel, and then, of course, we'll turn it over to the audience to ask their questions. I'd like to start with Pastor Christian. Pastor Christian, you've been elected to the Leesburg City Commission many times. How have you confronted racism during the election process and during your years in public service? In the fight against racism, how important is the election of minorities and people of color to public office?
Hello, everyone. First, let me say I've been fortunate to serve citizens of Leesburg, especially District 2, since 2004, as Sandy had mentioned. I've also been fortunate after my first election in 2004, every election that I was with, I had no opposition. So my time, I don't know if it was because people didn't want to run or they just felt I was doing such an awesome job. I'm on the city council. But I would just say on the aspect of minorities, especially local elections, I think that is vital because many our elected officials, especially now as Lake County grows, our cities are growing, they're not acclimated with the minority communities. They're not engaged with it. They don't know the stakeholders. And many of our elected officials are not aware of the many issues that face minority communities. For me, I think I've been fortunate to serve with some great city commissioners. Some have been more difficult and more less understanding of the issues of the African American community. Issues simple as community policing. How do we police minority communities? And it is a touchy situation because if you go in too strong, the community rebels, says, you're singling out certain communities. So it has to be a community issue with the council as well as the community. And oftentimes that minority commissioner, and I've always said for years to the commission, you know, I'm your conscience. I'm the guy that's gonna tell you how people in the community feel about the city's trust or distrust they have with the city government. For years, Leesburg was plagued. In 1983, 84, we had a federal lawsuit because NACP very methodically said that an African American can't be elected in Leesburg, and it was a fight to draw up a minority, a black majority district, which is one I served in. Forcing for myself and David Conner, who wanted to see it initially. I think many things that we see in Leesburg would not happen, and not anything for me. But I think just the voice of a gymnasium was one of my platforms of how do we keep young people off the streets, resource center providing resources and skills for minorities in our community. And of course, we've had people who are not black come to the city council and pretty much say the city of Leesburg doesn't need a resource center, which provides computer skills, provide meeting space. So blacks can just go over to Eustis, to Lake Tech. So it took a strong voice to actually say this is important. $2 million later, we have a resource center in the minority community, so those who are less fortunate can access services and rebuild their lives. The newest was a $5 million aquatic center. You know, where do you put it? One commissioner before me said, if you take it out of the swimming pool out of the white community, you have to put it back in the white community. Our city manager currently myself say, you know, a better place would be in the middle of the black community where kids can access a swimming pool. We have so many drownings in Florida because kids don't know how to swim. So it was a great compromise to put that pool right in the middle of the African American community. Now, I can say that when we talk about racism, we talk about misunderstandings. Oftentimes, I'll tell elected officials, especially black, you're too black for white people and you're not black enough for black people. Many African Americans, we feel you got to go in strong, you got to go in very aggressive. But I'm the type of person, I like to win. And without 3 votes on a commission, you don't win. So, you know, I'm not the person that says, let's grandstand, let's make a big deal, and we end up with a vote and a lot of hand claps. I want to get 3 votes to win whatever we do. And there are so many different mechanisms, the marching, the protesting, the sit down, behind the doors meeting. There are so many ways to victory. And I think we must confront those racist attitudes. Even in our city of Leesburg, I think maybe 2000, we had a black assistant city manager, and she had to oversee the airport. And the N-word at the Leesburg airport was thrown around so much because this black woman was now in charge of the airport. So even though we want to think racism doesn't exist, it exists very, very broadly. And we saw it in this last election cycle. But I'm proud to say in Leesburg that we embrace diversity. We have an African-American fire chief who was the deputy fire chief for years. And the city manager thought about, let's do a nationwide search. I said, why would you do a nationwide search when the deputy has been doing the job for the last 2 years? So we have the first African-American fire chief in Leesburg. The housing economic development director is an African-American. And our resource director was an African-American as well, who just retired. And my last point saying is that the economic development director, one of our major businesses in here in Leesburg, business owner, been around second generation here in Leesburg. He was in my office. He said, John, the economic development director can't be a black man because all new businesses are going to be white people, and they're not going to deal with a black man. And he's talking to me in my office, and we talked candidly, but that was how he really felt that at this day in 2000, I think it was 19 then, that a black man cannot be the economic development director. Now, the ironic part about that is when he got ready to do some business, he had a property on the main road that was a brownfield. And the only person in our city who can write the brownfield grant was that same black guy that helped get his property mitigated so he can build a commercial business and make about $500,000. So that's the mindset of people still in our communities, and we have to work to change that. And you change it by implementing positive policy and procedures that's going to look at people for their quality.
Thank you, Pastor Christian. You are really inspirational, and we truly, truly, truly need more Black and brown representation in our local government. We truly do.
Thank you, Sandy.
Okay, Pastor Mike, I'm going to ask you the next question. You were instrumental in the movement to stop the Confederate statue from coming to Lake County. You confronted racism. What was it that made that movement successful?
Okay, thank you, Sandy. First of all, thank you all for the invite, and certainly want to honor the people who are here trying to talk about racism. But I would like to say this, that, you know, if you see a good fight, get in it. That's what John Lewis said. And so when I heard about the situation about them bringing the Confederate statue to Lake County, it was kind of surprising to me. And after thinking about it for a little bit, I know myself and May Hazelton and Dorothy Daly Griffin and Pastor Eric, when we heard about it, we went up to the then county commissioner chair, who was Tim Sullivan. Went and met with him. He told us to meet with the Historical Society. We met with them. Then we ended up going to the Lake County Commissioners meeting. And there we met a lot of people. Pastors, the Democratic Club, and a lot of other individuals who were against the statue coming. And so what I would say is we just began a process. There's 14 cities in Lake County. We went to 9 of them. And every city we went to did a resolution saying they did not want the statue to come. And what we found out, that it wasn't the citizens that wanted this, it was the powers to be, the Lake County Commissioners and the Historical Society. They just made a decision to bring that without having any input from the community. And so that's what we had to deal with. To me, I want to say, like the good old boy system, they had been doing what they want to do for many years. And it had to be confronted so that we could have it where it looks that differently now. And I do believe if something like that happened again, they would want to talk with the community. So there was a lot of people got involved. There was a group called LCVOR that got involved, and a lot of people, I want to get into names, but so many people joined the effort. And most of the events that we went to, there was very few people opposing what we were saying. I think it was one commissioners meeting where there was quite a few representatives that wanted that statue to come, and most of them were from out of town. But most of the citizens of Lake County did not want it to come. And then we kept pressuring that. We kept going before them, and they had even taken a vote, say they was going to go forward. And then with God's providence, and we hate to hear that, you know, George Floyd got killed, but then that brought about a change in our world, and so many other people were protesting his death. And so it got to be a big thing where a lot of people were revoking against the violence and the racism that was going on. And the county commissioners changed their mind. I don't know exactly why they changed their mind, but the bottom line is we're thankful that they did change their mind. A 4-1 vote. I think Josh Blake was the only one that didn't vote for the statue not to come. So it was a community effort. I found out that there were people of all colors, pastors, community leaders, all kind of people came together to fight against this. So we're very grateful. And really all I did is just, I heard about it and I got involved, and we had a lot of help along the way. I got to admit that one of the things that disappointed me, if I want to say this, is that some of the evangelical, white evangelicals did not support us. We had a few that came along and helped us, but many of them that I contacted did not. And so I really don't know what the issue is there. But of course, Pastor Sandy, you was involved, and there's quite a few others, Pastor Eric and Dustin Hughes and a lot of others. But there was a lot of people in the mainstream, the big churches in the area did not support us in that. I know Pastor Christian was involved with some of our marches and stuff. So it was a great community effort to come against a statue that represents racism coming into our county. And if we had not spoke up, I'm sure they would have kept going forward with that. But when people come together and confront things, then we can make a difference. And so we're humbled by the fact that so many people got involved against that.
I think we can safely say that that statue being stopped from coming to Lake County moved Lake County it completely moved the county from a long history of Jim Crow and racism to a more equal and better place for all of us to live. So thank you, Pastor Mike. Thank you for leading that effort. Okay, now I'd like to ask a question of Pastor Dave. Pastor Dave, you grew up in a multicultural situation, and much of your work has been done in Latino organizations and communities, most recently with the Farm Worker Association of Florida in Apopka. What acts of racism have you witnessed or experienced?
Thank you, Sandy, and thank you to everyone who's been involved in organizing this. I really am honored to be here, to be a part of this panel this evening with Pastor Christian and Pastor Mike. As Sandy mentioned in the introduction, I grew up in kind of in a multicultural situation. I'm going to share a little bit of my own story, which I think is really connected with how I've experienced and seen racism. My parents were missionaries in South America, and I grew up from the time I was 3 months old until I was 16 in a tribal community. So my friends, all my friends were dark brown skin, and we did things that people do in the back, I say the back country of Brazil. When we went to the city, the folks that I was around, the kids that I played with in the streets and things, the people I met, kind of ranged in terms of race from black to white to brown to everything in between. Brazil is a very racial culture, a lot of racial mixing, and so folks are pretty much the full range, full spectrum of colors. My sister and brother were both adopted. And my brother's biological parents were Native people. My sister's father was an Afro-Brazilian, and her mother was white. And so that was part of our family makeup. And growing up in Brazil and with our family, I mean, there was a recognition of race, and yet in Brazil especially, I mean, it's really layered with culture and with language. So those were, there's more of a consciousness about culture and language. I knew as a kid and through my teen years, what language to speak depending on who was in the room, what behaviors were appropriate and what behaviors communicated depending on who was in the room. But I was also aware that, especially if we were in the city, that being white, blue-eyed, blonde, I was identified not so much as white, but as American. I was from the United States. That's the way people saw me. When I came to the US, I was 16. And I have to say, I mean, that upbringing, I feel like I grew up colorblind in a way. And really the first time that race was brought up as a factor in terms of who I was relating to was when I was at a church camp up in Wisconsin. My parents had been invited to come as the missionary speakers, and I was there as one of the campers. And the last evening of camp, there was going to be what they called the banquet. And a lot of folks were inviting dates to the banquet that evening. And so I invited a young woman that I had met over that week to be my date for this banquet. And later on, my parents commented to me, they said, "Oh, we noticed that you invited the Indian girl, Native American, as your date." To which I was kind of blank-faced. That had not registered for me at all. But that was the first time that my relationship with someone was identified in terms of the race of the other person that I sort of registered and remember. The undertone in the family and in the community the evangelical white community that I lived in, there were certainly racist attitudes and undertones there. I can remember very clearly the day that John Kennedy was killed. That was talked about in our family. I'm embarrassed to say that I do not remember the day that Martin Luther King was killed, even though I was either just arriving to the US or maybe already in the US, but that didn't even register. I mean, it was not something that was talked about in the circles that I was growing up in. My brother, who was dark-skinned, native, he shared with me one time, he was in college in Oklahoma. He went to a restaurant to have a meal, and the waitress came up to him and said, "We don't serve Indians here." He was asked to leave the restaurant. My wife is Isaura, who I met about 25 years ago in Chicago, is Afro-Brazilian. And in meeting Isaura, and as we've lived together and you know, our relationship has grown, my understanding of what it means to be Black, both in Brazil and in the US, has deepened. In a general sense, over all of these years, I've been aware of racism, and I've resisted when I hear racist language or racist attitudes being expressed. I don't like that. I respond negatively to it, at least inwardly and maybe outwardly as well. But 8 years ago, the murder of Trayvon Martin here in Florida was a point of change for me in terms of awareness about the experience of African Americans, my brothers and sisters, African Americans in this country. That brought to me an awareness that I know my Black brothers and sisters have lived with for generations. And then the news reports over the last 8 years, the violence and police violence, the killings of African men and women, both by police officers and also by other citizens, the language of the Trump presidency, the events of this last summer, all of those things have really deepened my awareness and are things that I'm aware of and alert to and follow in my own experience in life now. What I've experienced, what I've witnessed or experienced in terms of racism personally, first, I recognize that just in being white, I experience privilege in this society as I make my way through this life. In contrast to my Black and brown sisters and brothers, without having to do anything, it's like the flip side of racism in this society. I benefit because of my race. I witness racism in my personal family. When Isaura and I go into a store together, we're free to move around the store. No one's worried about that. No one's observing us. But if my wife Isaura goes into a store by herself, very often she'll be followed around. She'll be asked if she needs any help. Someone's always fiddling with something in the shelves just down the row from her if she's in a store by herself. But if we're both there, that doesn't happen. Racism in the Hispanic communities. I work with the Farm Workers Association of Florida. I've worked for the last 20 some years in mostly Latino communities. And again, there's kind of multiple layers of stuff going on, like in Brazil. There's race, there's cultural issues, there's immigrant status, there's language. However, race is a key identifying factor. Dr. Kendi, whose book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, there's a reading discussion group that's reading that right now here. He defines racism as attributing specific generalized characteristics to a person based on their race. And for Latinx, brown people, brown equals immigrant, Hispanic, undocumented, or as we heard even from the highest offices in this country, criminal, rapist, because of the brown skin. In Dr. Kendi's definition, these are racist attitudes, and if acted upon, are racist actions. I appreciate something has been helpful to me in my thinking about racism and my understanding is that Dr. Kendi says there is no such thing as not racist. There's either racist attitudes and actions, or there are anti-racist actions and attitudes. So for someone to say, I'm not a racist, that's a nonsensical statement. He argues that all of us act in racist ways at times and act in anti-racist ways at times. And there are those who emphasize acting in racist ways most of the time or choose to do that. There are those of us who are intentional about being anti-racist, going against the impact, the negative impact on people in our community and our surroundings based on race. And I just wanted to finish with just some specific kinds of racism that Latinos, Hispanics in our community experience. Police profiling is one. There's a neighborhood in Apopka that's made up mostly of Latino people, a poor neighborhood. And very often police officers will sit in the parking lot at the exit of that community, and they'll pull cars over as they come out of that community. There are undocumented people who have to get to work, who have to take their children to school, who have to go to the grocery store, but do not have license because our state will not allow them to have a license. And they get ticketed for that, and they get ticketed for it numerous times, and then they get fines and jail time because of not having a license. Our local sheriff, Grinnell, was one of the first sheriffs in the state of Florida who agreed to work with the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, ICE. And that meant that in picking up someone who's Latino, if there's a suspicion that this person is not documented, the sheriff's department can contact ICE with the person's information. And if ICE tells them to hold that person, they can hold that person for an additional 48 hours so that ICE can pick them up, process them, and very possibly deport them, separating them from their family. There was a case, a young man that whose family I know, who was stopped for a minor traffic issue. Had a brake light was out on his car. He was pulled over for that, and his buddy was with him in the car. And the sheriff's officer asked the driver for his documents, but then he asked the passenger for his ID. And that's actually not legal. And there's no reason for a passenger to be asked for an ID if they're just sitting in the other side of the car. But he was Latino. And so Latino means maybe not documented, whatever is going through the head of the police officer. But that's just another case of an action based on a person's race. And then my Latino friends tell me that they too, when they go into a store, very often they're followed around. They're asked if there's anything that they can be helped with. They feel like they're not trusted as well. My wife actually has stores that she won't go into anymore because she's not going to deal with their distrust. And I'm sure some of my Latino friends are the same way. So that's what I had to share at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. I think one of the biggest, most racist disservices that has been done in Lake County was the decision by the Lake County Sheriff to work closely with ICE and basically round up a lot of the Latino population in Lake County. It'll take years to undo that damage. So now I would like to ask each of the panelists a more specific question. How do we, as individuals in the audience, confront racism? And I would like to start by answering that myself. So it's one thing if the racist is in Washington, is, you know, in the insurrection in the Capitol, you know, a Proud Boy or one of the Oath Keepers. But what happens when it's upfront and personal? When the racist is a member of your family or the person next door to you, your next door neighbor. I have a niece, Chelsea, beautiful, beautiful girl, who decided to marry a tobacco chewing Trump supporter. And he's not the man I would have chosen for her, but you know how that goes. And I married them, and you know, he's family. He's family. So how do I deal with that? So one of the things that has helped me in dealing with family and dealing with close neighbors on racism is to draw on the experiences that I've had in working in prisons and to realize that a person's words and a person's deeds are not the person themselves, and that I have no business judging the person. That's up to God. However, racism is evil. There's no gray matter here. There's nothing up for discussion about it. Racism is evil. So there are two ways to go that I'm very careful not to do. One of the things that I'm very careful not to do when approached by a white racist is I don't smile politely, look at my watch, and walk away. Another thing that I don't do, if I can, I'm not as good at this, I don't get into heated arguments with them. Because getting into a heated argument with my niece's husband would do absolutely nothing more than to make him defensive and to have to defend himself. However, I take a stand. What white racists are looking for when they approach you is they're looking for agreement. They're looking for validation. They want to know that you are a member of their tribe and that you realize the importance of maintaining white superiority. And they never start out in their conversations with openly racist language. It's always very subtle. It's something like, well, what do you think about the Black Lives Matter movement? Or it's, look, just because I support Trump doesn't mean I'm a racist. It's something like that. But you know it's racist. You know in your bones where this conversation is going. And what I do is I take a stand. I'm just really very, very clear with them. I say, I support the Black Lives Matter movement. I am committed to racial justice and racial equality. And I am very uncomfortable with how this conversation is going. And when you're that clear with somebody, they don't ever approach you again with that kind of conversation. They don't ever come to you because they know where they're at. I mean, they know that they're on the fringe of society and that, so they just shut up. And really, that's all I found that you can do with them. They're still family. They still live next door to you. They still watch your house when you leave. You still watch their house when they leave town. but you have taken, but I have taken a stand, and they know who I am and where I stand on the matter. Okay, so now actually I'd like to ask Pastor Crump this question. So what steps are the Farm Workers Association taking to confront racism?
Thank you. And thank you for your thoughts about, how to interact with a person on a personal level. That's always a challenge. It's tough. I feel that. At the Farm Work Association, we define our work in terms of worker safety. So our focus is on farm workers. Early on, it was largely African-American farm workers. The organization started in 1983 in Apopka. Over the years, it's become largely Hispanic workers that we're working with. But worker safety is one of the areas that we focus on. And then workers' rights and immigrant rights. Our work includes education within the farm worker community. It also includes community organizing around particular issues or needs that are identified by the community. We do advocacy and policy work at the local, state, and national level, again, around primarily worker and immigrant safety and rights issues. Our guiding vision is, quote, a social environment where the contribution, dignity, and worth of farm workers are acknowledged, appreciated, and respected through economic, social, and environmental justice. This vision includes farm workers being treated as equals and not exploited and discriminated against based on race, ethnicity, gender, or immigrant or socioeconomic status. So what the association does to confront racism, we educate people about their rights. So to enable farm workers to understand what their rights are and to give them tools for standing up for those rights when they're being violated. We advocate for non-discriminatory policies and laws. And I have to say that in the state of Florida, every year, there are numerous anti-immigrant and anti-worker proposals that come before the state, brought by our congressional representatives at the state level. And every year we organize community members to go to Tallahassee to meet with their congressional representatives, to testify in committee meetings, to oppose those anti-immigrant, anti-worker proposals, and of course to fight for laws that actually support the workers in the state and immigrants. And I think another important way to address racism in our society is to bring people who are different from each other together. That's something that we do at the Farm Workers Association, but I think it's something that we're doing right here. I know there's several efforts right now in Lake County to bring people together, to understand, to learn from each other, to hear each other, to understand each other's life experience and challenges. At the association, while Latinos are the largest percentage, we also work with Haitian farm workers and African-American farm workers, and we attempt to bring Latinx, Haitian, African-American, and white folks together in various kinds of trainings and other settings to learn from and with each other. And a part of that is language justice also. So when we're in a room with someone who speaks Haitian Creole, then we want to make sure that that person is understanding and being understood within the context of other languages being spoken. And then to promote awareness in our larger population, we do this in a variety of ways, but to promote an awareness in the larger population about the importance and value of all people. And again, with the association, our particular focus is on farm workers. And again, the majority being Hispanic immigrants today.
Thank you. And let me ask Pastor Mike. Pastor Mike, how do you think the people in this audience should confront racism? How do we confront racism?
Can y'all hear me? Because I lost you for a second. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay.
But not see.
Well, you know, yeah, I lost connection somehow there. But what I would say to everyone is that you just got to look around you and you see things happening in your community. It's not enough to just say, I'm not a racist. You got to be an anti-racist. To me, a lot of it is systemic. A lot of things that go on in the county has been going on that way for a long time. And until those things are confronted and there's things being said, you know, like going to the city council meetings or look at various different things that are going on in your city and find something that you see is wrong and speak out against it or try to find ways to make it better. I know I attend every city council meeting in Tavares. I think last year I missed 3 of them. And I just sit and listen, and those things that I feel that we could say something about that would make it better for our communities. You know, we speak forward to join a lot of different organizations to try to just work toward making things better. But we got to get involved. And if you're not a person that get up and speak and talk in front of a lot of people, well, you know, voting is very important. So you can help with getting people registered to vote. You know, you can get out in your community and get the word out to help others get registered and do things dealing with voting or whatever. Just find a place where you can fit in, where that you can be of help. You know, like Pastor Christian was saying, how with him in Leesburg, look how he's allowed through his a way of doing things. He's got some buildings and stuff for the kids and for the community. See, he's using the gifts that he has. So every one of us got to look within ourselves and find those gifts and talents that God has given us, those passions that he's given us, and go and be about doing it. And we can make a difference. You know, you can't change the whole world, but you can throw a little pebble across a pond and make a whole bunch of ripples. And that's what we want to do. We want to make a bunch of ripples because we want to try to change things. There are people who are doing things because they always done it that way. When I meet people who moved down here from up north and stuff, and they see Lake County, they say, man, I can't believe how far behind Lake County is. Well, you know, there's some things that go on here that don't go on in other places. When we go to other counties, we see a lot of African American in positions. You know, we don't have an African American county commissioner. Tavares has never had a African American council person. And so there's a lot of things that need to be done. And certainly African Americans, we have to step up and try to get in these positions, run for these positions. But I tell you what, a lot of these positions, the good old boy system has got it locked up where it's very hard for you to do that. So I would just encourage us that there is a lot of people, though, who see that things are not right. They know it has to be a change, and we have to join together, people of all races, to try to push to make things better. And we got to deal with those people in power, those people in authority. They're the ones who got the power, and they have to be enlightened in the sense of things have got to change. And when we keep you know, bring it before them, things will change. You know, I hear a lot of people say, Pastor Mike, why y'all be always complaining? Things are a whole lot better than what it used to be. Well, that's not good enough for me. I want to be where my wife, my children, my grandchildren will be looked upon and treated the same way everybody else's is. And until that happens, we have to keep bringing things before people. We have to continue to fight for our equality. And we need everyone helping us to do that, because that's the way God intended. We're all God's creation, and we all should be treated equally. And some people just out of habit, because of the way it's always been, they do things to people. Like I say, the county commissioners, there's no way that they should have accepted that statute. They should have said, wait a minute, I wonder how our African American community would feel about bringing a Confederate statue that symbolizes racism. They should have thought that. But then there wasn't no African American on the council. I'm sure if one would have been on the board there, they certainly would have said something. But I believe that since we have dealt with that issue going forward, that will be looked at differently. So those are the headways that we got to make, and we'll continue, and we ask your support, continue to make it even playing field. And this last thing I'm gonna say, so many people, when I talk about this, tell me that white America is tired of Black people confronting them about inequality, and they're saying they'll just pull themselves up by the bootstraps like the rest of us. That's what I hear all the time. But the truth of the matter is, when Black folks were slaves, they were free without giving them anything. So the bootstrap is not the same. It's not the same playing field. People have had to start from nothing. I remember in Lake County myself going to the doctor's office, and they had a Black section and a white section. That was in the 60s. That's not that long ago. So African Americans have done a great job of going forward, but there's things that people still do today, and people don't understand that it hinders people from getting where they want to be. So we got to work on that. We got to enlighten people to know that it ain't a even playing field for everybody. But given a chance, I believe people will succeed. Black families want to raise their families, send their kids to school, and they want to work hard just like everybody else. There's just a lot of obstacles that is there in high places that we got to deal with. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Mike. And Pastor Christian, how should the people in this audience, the people that are here today, what should they do to confront racism?
Well, saying to everyone, I think it's important for us to work together. I think we have 60 plus people on the line tonight, and we must find out that our differences should not divide us. Our methods of changing racism should not be a dividing force. I talk about in the African American community all the time. We have so many different organizations who want the same thing. I think Pastor Mike said that single mom with 3 kids, she does want her kids to go to college. She does want her kids to get out of poverty. And I had to experience when one of our city council members, when he won the election, he came from a very affluent family. Before he was seated, he wanted to go to breakfast with me. He asked a question. He says, "John, I don't understand affordable housing. Why should we give a person help with down payment?" And he said, "I just don't understand why we would do that." And it wasn't a racist thing. It was just, I come from a very affluent family, and I don't understand why I need to give anybody a down payment assistance. So I think even the younger politicians, younger people who are getting these political seats, it may not be quote unquote racism, it may just be a sense of ignorance or a fact that I've never come to the knowledge of why. So I explained to him about this mother who works at Walmart. She goes to work. She's a citizen. She went to the Lake County public school system. She's never been in trouble. She has 3 daughters. She's not married. She's divorced, but she wanted her children to have a house. That family worked for the CDC. The Homes and Partnership built the house. Her daughter now, one's a pharmacist, doctor of pharmacy, one's getting her PhD, and another's working in the health profession. All because she had an opportunity to become what we call the American dream. And that's what we have to do, is educate people in our circle. There'll be people who may not address me in certain things that they may address my Caucasian brother. And it's going to be an opportunity for us to educate them on all Black people are not, wanting someone to give them something. There are a lot of prideful Black people in our communities who are very prideful, and they don't want anything from anybody. They want to work, they want to better themselves, but the opportunities are just not there. We start looking at our local governments, our local school districts, and we thank God for Molly Cunningham, because she was the most qualified. But in Lake County, we have to make sure that we are promoting the most qualified, not the Republican or the Democrat or the person who's the most qualified that's going to push issues and change our county. And for long, we've got the person who was the most popular, but wasn't the most qualified. I think when we talk about racism, we ought to call that out. We ought to speak it. And in Leesburg, of course, we have the minority seat, but there were three candidates. One was a Latino woman, and one was a Black man and a white man. And one of my friends who does work around Lake County and Sumter County, he said, John, I thought Lake County had changed. I thought Leesburg had changed. When I asked people why they were voting for the white candidate, they simply said, because we can't have two Blacks on the council at the same time. And this 2020, 21. So you got to understand that in our downtowns, in our secret organizations, or our private groups, this kind of stuff still rings out in a progressive city. As I say, Leesburg, we still have that same mindset running through our communities, that we cannot have two African Americans or Black and Latino, because they may vote to put too much stuff in the Black community. I've been accused of, that's all I talk about, I think about, and vote on the Black community. Well, anybody who knows government knows I have to vote on everything from the public works department, the swimming pool, but I'm the one that's more familiarized with the African American community. So I speak up on those things that I'm really familiar with and taking a stand. So that's where each of us have to take that stance in our own circles, in our own churches. As Pastor Mike said, and I say in Leesburg, we have a Black ministerial alliance and a white ministerial alliance. And they said, why don't we just have one? I said, because my white pastors cannot get in front of the church, even though they have a congregation of people who have no health insurance. They can't say the word Affordable Care Act, or they'll get fired. They can't say Obamacare, they'll get fired. But there may be people in their congregation who needs health care. But because they have business owners who are going to complain about minimum wage increase, complain about how the business has hurt their business with their insurance costs. So there are issues that Black pastors have to address that our white pastors may not address. You look at the civil rights movement. Dr. King had white pastors with him, but in a letter to Birmingham jail, he wrote to the other white Anglo-Saxon pastors who thought he was going too fast. So even in those times, and still now, we have a divide on how we confront racism, how we change people's mind. And just think, these are all people who say they love God, and yet we still have a divided community. And most of those people sit in our congregation on Sunday morning, but still don't worship, don't fellowship, don't interact with African Americans unless they're working for them. And my last point saying, if you go back, and as Pastor Mike talked about the 60s in Lake County, we had what we call orange groves, and our Black families worked in these orange groves. There were no Social Security, there was no taxes coming out there. They just gave them some cash. But when they turned 65 and 70, guess what happened? They didn't get a Social Security check from the government large enough to take care of their personal responsibilities. Now, those white landowners, they got rich off the backs of Black people. So for me, it's modern day slavery. And we keep saying, well, why can't Blacks just move past it? That wasn't long ago when the NAACP and Black people fought for equal pay in Lake County, where Black school teachers got less pay than white school teachers. That wasn't very long ago here in Lake County. And so we got to understand that there are people who make great sacrifices for us. They risk their jobs, their reputations. I think of Betty Coney, who was involved in a lawsuit. She was pretty much what said you won't be moving up in Lake County School System as a principal around elementary. So people sacrifice so much, and we must understand nobody raised their hand and said, I want to be poor. So we have to make sure that we're providing opportunities for everyone in our community. So we must go to our local governments, our local churches, our local business, ask the question, are you hiring African Americans because you need good quality labor, and are you paying decent wages so they can support their families? And that should be, all of us have that ability, because we work, we're retired, we have ability to talk to leaders in our communities. And I think we need to put that at the forefront. This is not a DC issue, this is a Lake County issue that I think we can make it come to a life to change people's lives if we speak up about what we see. And we talk about systematic racism. Look in your local government, look in your local communities. Why are we code enforcing taking people's property in the African American community? What are we doing with it? Are we giving it to nonprofits? In Leesburg, we give code enforced properties to the nonprofit to remodel and give a sale back to their residents. So we got local governments that are going into African American communities who are often underserved, and we're code enforcing their property, and they can't even pay to fix them. What's the local government doing with those properties once they receive them? Are they return them to nonprofits? Are they turn them to Habitat and say, let an African American, Hispanic, or low income family move into these houses to get that American dream? There are so many things that we can put at our city council level, our county commission level to make sure that we're helping those people that we want to fight for. I can't fight for my congregation if I'm not in the forefront saying I want to be a homeowner. I want to have a decent wage. I want your children to have a good school system. So I'm in contact with the school board members. I'm in contact with the superintendent. I'm in contact with our county commissioner because I don't want to see crime run through our communities. That's pretty much the racism. We turn a blinded eye and said, let drugs run through the communities. Let people not become educated. Let people not have decent jobs. Let's not provide job people. We give subsidies to companies that come to Lake County. When was the last time we said, make sure you hire brown and black people? If I'm gonna give you free land and give you $300,000, make sure you hire people in our community that can have those decent wages. Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you. Thank you. And now we're going to open the questions. Are there any questions from the audience?
Okay, Sandy, this is Henry, and I'm going to ask the tech spotters who are watching the gallery, members of the audience, you're being watched for your hands to wave. And if you have a question, wave your hand and one of our tech spotters will call on you. We can only do one person at a time. We have over 60 people here tonight, so we'll try to get to as many as possible. Once you're called upon, please unmute yourself and ask your question, and Sandy will direct the question to the appropriate panel member. All right, so let's give it a whirl. I'm going to ask tech spotter Carol, do you see somebody with a question?
Not at the moment.
Okay, how about tech spotter Janine? Do you see any questions?
No, I don't.
Okay, and keep in mind, we have some questions in the chat box that I'll get to, but let's see if we have in-person ones first.
May I?
Go ahead, Janine.
Yes. May Hazelton?
Go ahead, May, unmute yourself.
I have a question for Pastor Christian. And my question has to do with how we in the African American community come together and maximize our political strength so that we can do in some of the other cities in Lake County what you've done or you've helped Leesburg to do, and how can we do some of those things in Tavares and Eustis and Mount Dora and the others? How can we come and take advantage of the experience that you have, so that we can make some of the improvements in those cities, so that when code enforcement gets to a building, that if that building is then turned back into the community, or if a park or a recreational facility is, they're working on that recreation facility, those monies that go back into that facility goes back into hiring people from the community. How can we take advantage of it? Because one of the things, when you think of the Good Old Boy Network, there's something, we always look at that as a negative. And it is negative because the Good Old Boy Network intentionally keeps people out of progress. But there's also another side to that, is when you network in a positive manner to say, I have a skill set and I know how to do this, and let me share. So that's one way that the community improves and grows. What are your thoughts on that?
And I think it's awesome. I think the first thing is, when I was in Leesburg, I attended city council meetings as a young father with 3 kids at home. I spent my Monday nights at the city council learning and getting myself familiarized with so many things. I was a community activist. We had started Men of Distinction with about 50 young people. They were aged 16 to 18. So those became a strong voting block for me. But I was enthused and excited because I know Leesburg needed an indoor facility for young people. So I would come to the city council meetings. I would probably irritate and aggravate them so much. I didn't even live in the city. Then I ended up moving to the city. So when I ran for office, You know, of course, you know, in the Black American community, you know, we oftentimes we let people pick quote unquote our leaders. And oftentimes some leaders need to kind of move aside and let some new leadership come from forward. And many times that doesn't happen in the African American community. We don't change board presidents. We let the same board presidents stay there, even though they may be ineffective, because this is the norm. When I came, it was kind of, you know, I'm just coming in because it's something I need to do, something my community need to do, and I had the support of my community. It split Leesburg African American community because the older crew was like, no, we're going to keep it the status quo. The young crew said, we know we need change. So after that, you know, vote was happened, took place, the community rallied and we strategized. And I would say, Senator Tavares, you know, what seat is vulnerable? What seat is a person who really not doing anything? Who can we get to run and who can we support without people saying, well, yeah, let's support Pastor Mike. Well, I don't like Pastor Mike. Well, you're not doing anything, so you just be quiet. And so I think in that strategy, we get a platform. What does Tavares need? What does Umatilla need? Claremont, you know, voted for Tim Murray, first Black mayor Claremont, but that took years of Tim running, years of Tim. And many people, they get tired of running and not winning. So it takes that persevering, that special person. And I tell people in the African American community, the shows that I stand on, they don't want to be disrespected. That's why I got a shirt and tie, because Margaret Ward say, when a young John Christian, don't you ever go to the city council without a shirt and tie and a jacket on. So whenever I stand before people, I try to get a shirt and tie and a jacket. Margaret Ward told me, don't you ever go before the people, because Black people, you know, we were told you had a higher standard. And I know we like to relax that standard, but we can't be respected. And I tell you, a white guy came to the city council, he says, nobody's up there educated except Dan Roebuck. Well, Bob Bone had a law degree. I got an MBA. Santa Henderson, I think, had a master's degree, but that was just to make me and others feel bad that we weren't educated. So, you know, we get that education, we get an agenda, and we go in the same direction, and not divide our community or the people that believe in that candidate, that he's going to bring real change. Not that he's a Black candidate, but he's a candidate that's going to bring equality to the city. So I'll be happy made to sit down and talk more. But I think it's important that I tell in Leesburg, we should have candidates running. We had our first city forum. I told people, let's hear what people are going to do. All the time, we just let people walk into our city council. We don't know if they're going to help the community or destroy the community because we never hear from them. So CDC had a community forum where we literally want to hear from the candidates in Leesburg. But I'll be more than happy, you know, to share everything that I know. And I was not a politician. I didn't know anything about politics. I ran on sheer, I want to change my city. And I raised less money because African Americans, you know, traditionally don't give to political candidates. I think I raised $5,000. My opponent raised like $12,000. So it's very hard because we don't have many people that's going to write a $500 check to your city commission candidacy because it's nonpartisan. So, you know, it's all about getting people that's going to support your candidate so you can run a professional campaign and not just, you know, I want to do it. But I think we got to get past I want to do it, so I want to win. Did I answer all your questions, Ms. Hamilton?
Okay.
Thank you. You did. Thank you so much. I appreciate that insight.
All right. Spotter Kit, do you have anyone with a question? You need to unmute, Kit. Okay. Do you have anyone with a question, Kit?
I have a question. Heather Rabinowitz, nobody's calling on me.
Yeah, go ahead, Heather. Go ahead, Heather. Go ahead, Heather.
Okay, thank you. In sharing the bounty of what's available right now with the COVID vaccinations, my husband and I went and got shots in Leesburg at the Sears building. It was very easy to get an appointment because there was a phone number that somebody told us about. And we called, we got connected to somebody, and they gave us an appointment for a week later. And we went in, it was highly organized, and we got our shots. we were very startled to see among the probably 200 to 300 people that were traveling through that building, there was not a single African American there. And the day before, my friend had been there and he told me the same thing, that it was well organized, they did a great job, but there were no African Americans in sight. So I just wondered, is there no representation that's helping the people in the Leesburg and Lake County community get that phone number? It was really hard to know how to get registered for a shot. But just calling, trying to go online and calling Publix and whatever you saw from the county, none of that was very efficient. None of it worked for us until somebody verbally told us, here's a phone number you can call to get into the line. So that's my question. Is there anybody helping? Like, I would think the pastors with their congregations, they could give out that phone number. It's a publicly available phone number. I'd be glad to give it to you if you wanted it.
This is Pastor Mike. I would like to say, and you can certainly give the number, but the Lake County Health Department, I know, has an initiative within the African American community with our churches. I know Molly Cunningham had gave me a flyer, and I called Miss Vera Hart, and so several of our churches in our community volunteered to say that we would be a site in the Tavares area, and so we asked the members of our church who all want to be vaccinated. So I know now there is an initiative. I don't know how things were before, and I heard in Leesburg as well, in other cities, the churches have been contacted, or they've been given information on how you could be a site for vaccination. I think the vaccine push come in sometime. Hopefully, will be a site, or one of our churches in our community be a site, and African Americans 65 and over can come and get the vaccination.
So they have to be notified to go there. It's not just a matter of having a site. It's a matter of contacting them and say, here's the site. Do you need a ride?
Yes, well, this initiative I know is through the churches, and the churches are reaching out, letting people know that the vaccine will be coming in our area. And yeah, I'm sure the churches, if there's people who need rides, we will certainly give them. Now, that phone number, if you're willing to give that phone number, that's fine, because the way I see it, the first place you can go to and get it, go ahead and get it. But I know there is an initiative that's going to be reaching out to our communities with our churches, and hopefully people will, those who choose to, there's some people choose not to take the vaccine.
Right.
So those who choose to take it can certainly have opportunity to take it.
Okay, I'm going to disappear a minute so I can go get the number.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
I have a.
Can I hold on a second? I've got a couple things here I want to cover from the chat box, and then we'll move on to more questions.
Henry, we have two people who've been waiting quite a while, Vincent Felton and Donna Clark.
Yes, very good. We'll get to them. Let me mention this. Val, I have a question for you, for everybody, really. This is being recorded, correct, Val Rosado?
Yes.
And that recording will be available on YouTube, so people can go back and listen to this and watch this again if they want to, correct?
Yes, it will.
Okay. Now, the chat box contents will also be provided to people. Is that true, Val?
I can do that.
The reason I say that is because we have many comments in the chat box, and I want everybody to be able to read the comments. I don't have time to read the comments all tonight, but many more comments than questions, but they're worth noting. So we want to be sure that the chat box contents are available to people after this session. And another administrative thing, we've had a question. Can you provide email addresses for Sandy and the three panelists? Sandy, is that possible?
I certainly don't mind if my email address is given out. I think Pastor Mike, Pastor Christian, Pastor David, do you mind if your email addresses are given out?
Fine with me.
No, I don't mind.
That'd be fine with me too. Yep, I'm okay.
Okay, I will send an email to everyone who is participating tonight that includes a link to the YouTube video and those 4 email addresses. And what was the other thing, Henry?
The box contents. Did you mention that?
And the chat box, right. It'll be a
Okay.
transcript of the chat box.
Very good. And there's one other item here, and that is Safra Baccarat has provided to everybody the email address of the Interfaith Council of Lake County, which was asked for by a couple of other people in the chat box. So I want you to be aware of that, and another reason to have the contents of the chat box, because that email address is in there. Now, I know that Vincent Felton has been an active participant in the chat box tonight, and he's also got his hand up, or did recently. So I'll call on Vincent now if he would like to make any comments or ask a question. Vincent Felton, are you still with us?
He's muted.
I don't see his picture lately. It was there earlier. What about Donta Clark? Are you available, Donta?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Okay, yes, go ahead, please.
All right, great. Really great what you guys are doing here. Very, happy to hear all the conversation and dialogue. I just have a question for Pastor Mike, Pastor Christian, and Pastor Crump. Just oftentimes I have this conversation with my friends or colleagues. But what are one or two, just simple ways that I can share, or maybe others here can share, to say, how can we get involved to make a difference in the community? Because often, in the Black community, we would say, oh, we need this, we need that. But what are like one or two, nothing, elaborate, but I can share that are just real simplicity in saying, hey, this is what we can do to make a difference in our community.
Okay, who would like to answer that first? Pastor Christian, do you want to answer that first?
Yes, Brother Clark. I think some very simple ways is to join an existing group that meets your same level of expectation, that's doing some of the things that you would like to see. There are a lot of groups I know in Leesburg, CDC, got 2 CDCs in Leesburg, NACPs in here in Leesburg, the office. Lake Community Action Agency. There are some groups that are doing some amazing things in our community, and they need some energetic new ideas. Oftentimes people, they say I want to do things, but they just they don't follow through. So I think there are some great programs that we're doing. The Resource Center is a great place to create computer training, home buyer classes. We have a room that holds 100 people for credit repair. So there are a lot of things that you can team up with some of the local organizations already here that just some of them just need a little boost. So I'm sure that any of these organizations would love to have your ideas, input, and I think that'd be a great way to get started without having to recreate an organization.
Okay, all right.
Hello, Vince, back.
Vincent, is that you, Vincent?
Yeah, I'm back. My battery went low and I had to get a power source.
Okay, Vincent, go ahead.
All right, my question is, why is it so difficult for people to understand the multiplicity of communities in the United States? And I'll give you a simple example. When you go to the Olympics, when the Russians enter the Olympics, they have a very large delegation, but they're basically Russians. And when the Chinese enter the Olympics, they are a big delegation, but they're basically Chinese. And most of the communities who enter the Olympics are that way. But one of the largest communities that enter the Olympic is the United States. And it's made up of a multicultural delegation. And through this multicultural delegation, we win a lot of medals. But after the Olympics, and we see this in real sight, in real vision, all of these people who are Americans contributing to one goal, which is to win medals for America. But after the Olympics, everybody acts like these other communities, these other people, they don't exist, that just you exist and nobody else exists. So why is it so difficult for us to understand the multiplicity of communities that make up the United States? That's my question.
Who would you like to answer that question?
Anyone? Anyone, please.
Okay, Pastor Mike, do you want to answer his question?
You know, that's a tough question in the sense of that we just got to educate people. And, you know, for me, the young people, you know, as we invest in these young people and we see young people interacting together and not allowing race to be such a big issue in their lives, we keep working on that. We're building for the future, because I'm gonna tell you, there are some people that, you know, of age, they just ain't changing. I mean, it's just that they have been raised up a certain way, and that's a certain way they feel. I mean, just think about even today with the, you know, we've seen the impeachment case there. Man, it's enough evidence that Stevie Wonder seen that man was guilty. But there's people who are set in their ways. They're convinced that they're going to follow somebody, whether they right or wrong. They're just going to stick with it. So there's people that of age that we're not going to change their mindset, no matter how clear it's wrong. So for me, our young people, we have got to invest in these young people and teach them diversity. You know, our kids, get them exposed to a lot of different people and places, and kids get to see each other interact, and they don't look at race nearly as much as grown-ups do, because it's the future generations that we got to look for that are going to bring about a lot of change. Even this past summer, when a lot of the George Floyd movement was going on, there was a lot of young people said, that's enough of this. And they really spoke out. And even in the voting, the young people really let their voices be heard through their voting. And so that's something that, for me, that's who I look at. People who are young, people who are willing to listen, got an open mind. Let's educate them about race. Sit down and talk with young people about how Blacks feel and how whites feel, and why we do what we do, and help them to see things different. Because there are people, it'll be like you're talking to the wall. They're just not going to change their mind, no matter what you say, no how much evidence you show. They're just not changing. So you can't spend all your time with people set in their ways like that. So let's build for the future and work with the people you can. But what I'm saying, when you run against a roadblock on that, you got to let that go and move on and try to bring the people together.
Okay.
There's something called throwing pearls before swine.
And just
So
to
much you can do
follow
with
up,
some people.
and follow on that, Ms. Jane, I was Sandy, when I go to Orlando Magic basketball games, I ask my kids a question. I said, how can racism exist? You got 20,000 people in an arena, probably 16,000 are Caucasian, rooting for at least 10 Black men playing basketball. So I wonder how in the world you go to a football game, majority of people out there are Black people. We're rooting for them. We wear their jerseys when we walk out of those arenas and stadiums, and we still have a problem with race. So I don't know how we can root for our favorite athletes, or our favorite musician, Michael Jackson, Beyonce, but yet and still we got a problem. And Spike Lee pointed out that if you watch Do the Right Thing, he says, yeah, he has one of the race. He says, well, guy said, well, who's your favorite athlete? Who's your favorite singer? He said, it's African Americans. Said, yeah, but they're different than other. They're not different. You know, and I think that's what we got to get people to understand. If you can root for Michael Jordan or LeBron James, wear his $200 shoes, you should be able to shake John Christian or Michael Watkins' hand, and we can move past some of our differences. I think you have to challenge the racists, challenge those who may not understand. The reality of it is that most people don't understand a person of a different color. They don't understand because we don't go to the same lunch. I like fried chicken, you like baked chicken. That's not a problem. We just got to understand that your chicken is different than my chicken, but we all have to eat and live.
All right, thank you. I want to point out in the chat box, Clarissa Davis has provided the information for the NAACP address and so forth. And so you can find the chat box. And I want to go to a couple of people whose questions are similar. Cassandra Brown notes that it's disheartening to not have adequate representation of someone like herself on the governments here locally. And Jane Hefting asked about diversity officers perhaps appointed in governments. And Cassandra asked, what about community action boards? So those types of issues like community action boards and diversity officers and so forth. What do you think about those things?
Pastor Christian, you,
I think they're great. I think they should not come from the power that be. So if Lake County have a diversity office, I don't think it should be mandated by the county commission, because we have a church location in Wildwood, and I was invited to a community group that the city manager had put together. Well, what ends up happening is that the African Americans got into the room and started complaining about all the issues in the community. Well, the city manager sent word to the community that the committee that if you guys don't become more positive, I'm going to disband the group. So if you're going to have community action boards, they have to have the liberty to call out those injustices of things that are not good. You look at Leesburg Election Department, we have probably 2 African Americans in the whole department. Fire department, same type of thing with a black chief. So you have to have a board that's going to be able to speak to those injustices without being disbanded when they hurt people's feelings, because racial issues hurt feelings, because people don't want to look in the mirror and say, you know what, we do have a problem in our city. We do have a problem with hiring and retaining and promoting minorities. If you go to a hiring process and you got a panel of 6 white people and you got 12 candidates and 1 black, who do you think they're going to hire? And of course, we're going to all say I'm hiring the best candidate, but in order to change racism, it has to be intentional. You have to hire people that's going to diversify your organization. So community action boards need to be independent, and they need to have the ability to speak to those things that are unjust.
Okay, thank you. Spotters, do you have any people with personal questions that you see needing to be asked?
Yes, Diana Reed's had her hand up for quite a while.
Okay, thank you. Diana, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to home and talk about the Lake County Commission. I don't know the history, but I think that before we can get anybody who's Black on the commission, it would almost have to be nonpartisan. I mean, I think that Molly was able to get on the school board because it was nonpartisan, unless she wanted to run as a Republican. Because nobody can get on the county commission here who is not a Republican, to my knowledge. It just isn't done. And it's the only way that Doug Shields got on there. He ran as a Republican. But should the county commission be a partisan body, is there any way to have a movement to change that, to make it nonpartisan? I think that would open it up a lot. Molly is a Republican. Okay, well, maybe that's why she was able to get. No, it's a nonpartisan race, and she was the most qualified, obviously.
Okay.
But I just wondered about this county commission because it is locked up by Republicans.
David, do you want to answer that? Pastor
Yeah, I would just like to comment on these last couple of comments and questions. Going back to what Pastor Mike said earlier about organizing around the statue. You know, people organizing is how we can get some things done. The challenge is that, you know, there's this group of us here, 60 something or whatever this evening. And, you know, we listen to a good conversation and we appreciate it, and we have questions and we have comments, and we probably overall are on a similar page with each other. But the next step is really to come together in a way and really begin to strategize what steps do we take in order to achieve specific goals that we have for the community. And again, I think the organizing around the statue is an example of that. That seemed like a pretty steep hill to climb, and yet it got climbed, and we actually resulted in a change in what happened in this county. And so I'm not sure how we do that, but coming together as people who are have a shared concern and commitment to our community, I think is really critical. And I'm sure both pastors, Mike and Pastor Christian, have done a lot of that already, but it seems like that's an important move towards making the kinds of changes we're talking about.
Okay, thank you.
Just, you've got to have a specific goal that people can rally around. You don't get together and just say we want to be active. And I wanted to find out if there was any knowledge about how to change this, or if it's possible to change this county commission. That is a real seat of power in this county.
Mhm.
Okay.
I mean, that would be a goal to rally around.
We have a
You might need a rainbow. You might need a rainbow coalition. If any one group steps up, for example, if it's a Black group, then we're considered just Black people wanting something or complaining about something. But if the coalition is a rainbow coalition, then people realize it's more than just us or just one group. It's the community that desires this thing.
I actually couldn't agree with you more.
And I think
we have a question. If I could let this person ask a question. Eileen Tramanta has had her hand up. I wonder if you'd like to ask your question.
Yes, good evening, everybody. And I'm really enjoying the conversation. I've been involved in environmental ed and I work at the Trout Lake Nature Center. And one of the big concerns for over 30 years for me has been environmental justice. And most nature centers and most environmental ed group do not have good representation of the populations in their community. Trout Lake itself is an example. How do we get more involved and get the community involved and concerned?
Who would you like to ask that question to?
Whoever has some sort of answer.
Okay. Pastor David, do you want to answer? You're muted.
Yeah, thanks for passing the tough question to me. Yeah, I mean, how do we get people involved? I guess, I mean, we get information out to folks. We need to find people who share the concern, you know, around the Nature Center, for example. What are the goals? What are the interests and focus of the Nature Center? And who are folks that are interested in that? And then can those folks reach out and build community around themselves who, you know, that they can engage in participating as well. I know at the Farm Worker Association, I mean, we have also opportunities for people from the community to be involved in various kinds of volunteering opportunities. And a lot of times it's them bringing their friends, people that they know, to be a part of what they've committed to at the Farm Workers Association that then grows the group involved. So those are my thoughts, but maybe others would have additional thoughts.
And it's not just having them involved, but they are often having the consequences of bad environmental decisions. You know, they don't have the political power, they don't have the monetary power, and often stuff has been located in their neighborhoods, but their families are living with the results of lead poisoning, polluted waters, and different things like that. And they don't know what to do or even know that it's there to worry about or fix.
Okay.
Pastor Mike?
Yes, if I can, I don't have another answer to that question, but I did want to say something real briefly about this Lake County and the Democrat-Republican type situation. So we're in a closed ballot county. So now the last commissioner race, okay, Doug Shields, before the election, he said that he was against the statue coming. Okay, so Doug Shields did not put in his request to, you know, run until like the last hour. If he would have did it earlier, his opponent could have had someone put in to run as a Democrat, and then that would have caused all the Democrats to have to vote for the Democrat. Doug Shields won because many of us who are Democrats voted for him against Tim Sullivan, who for a large part of the time was for that statue coming, and he changed his mind just for election time, when Leslie did. So here's what I'm saying. Wendy Breeden, who I certainly want to vote for, but her opponent, Kirby Smith, he had someone to put in as a Democrat. So that means Democrats couldn't vote for Wendy Breeden. So what I'm trying to say is, here's to me, the good old boy network here when it comes to Republican and Democrat. The only way Doug Shields got in there was because his opponent did not have time enough to have it where they throw somebody in, a name in as a Democrat running, to force Democrats to have to vote Democrat. If you're in a race, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, if there's a race, if you're a registered Democrat, if there's a Democrat running, you have to vote Democrat. You can't cross over. And so that's how they got it set up. And I guess I heard that both sides do it, but it eliminates us from picking the right person for the job. And we have to go strictly down party lines on those races that are Democrat or Republican. And that makes it very difficult. So we certainly, in my opinion, have to get away from this closed race way of doing things, because people could just use the system to block other people from voting for someone, and then have them have to vote for someone who's not even really a real candidate.
Right.
Okay,
They use write-in candidates a lot, not of the other party, but just a write-in candidate to close the primary.
We do have a hand up, and then we're going to start winding it down. Jane Hepting, did you have something you wanted to say? Is that quite
agreeing with Diana? It's the write-in candidates the problem. That's
not going to get well if you keep smoking that stuff.
It's getting well.
Because you've been asleep for 2 days and haven't smoked. You start
okay, someone's
smoking
not
again.
muted. Yes.
But
when
the write-in candidate is somebody that other candidate has had to do that. That's the thing, is what I'm saying.
Right, because Doug filed at the last minute. Tim Sullivan didn't think he was going to have an opposition in the primary. Otherwise, because there was no opposition of a different party, Democrats were allowed to vote in the primary.
That's right.
So they had the choice of Tim or Doug, and probably a lot of Democrats vote for Doug because of his stance on conservation issues. But what often happens is one party will file a write-in candidate so that keeps other parties from voting in the primary. It's an ugly system. It needs to change.
Well, we've had a very active meeting here. I want to read one phone number here that Heather Rabinowitz has posted, but I thought I'd read it anyway because although it's in the chat, this is the COVID-19 hotline. It's 866-201-6909. Okay, because we did have a number of questions, and that's a very specific item that people asked about. I think that's about it, unless we have a really burning question. I don't see any burning hands. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Russ. Russ, are you there?
I am, yes. Thank you. So I thank you to all of the panel and to Sandy for a thoughtful conversation and a helpful one, I think, in many ways. I think one thing that it points out is there's lots of work yet to be done. So we are running short on time. I just want to remind you to tune in again next month on March 14th, when we will have the third of our three-part series on racism, this one on experiencing racism. And the scheduled speaker is Cassandra Brown, former president of the Central Florida chapter of the ACLU. So until that time, I want to extinguish our chalice and to remind all of us to keep the light of social justice and healthy environment burning. Good night and stay safe.